How to compare in JavaScript. In JavaScript, we have different comparison operators that might help us compare different things. Let's write a simple if statement. Let's console log that this statement is true. It's just for clarity that we can immediately see the results in our console. If we are using literal true, we see this statement is true. And let's write else. And this statement is false. As you remember, if we're using literal values, the JavaScript can help us to immediately see the result. So we see the transparency of the first line is a little bit brighter, a little bit greater than the transparency of our else statement. What if instead of the true or false statements, we want to compare different things? For example, 10 equals 10. I used triple equal operator to compare two numbers. If I save the file, we see that this statement is true. From this example, we understand that this comparison returns true because we see the same statement that was when we had true statement. And that's how it works. It generally asks a question. So is this number equal to second number? And if they aren't equal, for example, I put 1, and save the file, we have that this statement is false. Otherwise, it returns false, so our else statement is activated. Using this operator, we also can compare strings, not only numbers. For example, I can write 10 and ask equal to cat. And we will see false because 10 is not equal to cat. This example is obvious, but what if I put 10 right here? We still have false value. So you should understand that if we are using triple equal comparison, objects of different data types are always false. Even though that it seems that this value should be true, it is false. And it's really important to consider where you're using this operator. Let's try to compare two strings, Bob with capital letter and Bob with non-capital letter, and we have false. Because JavaScript is case sensitive, it means that capital letters and small letters are different. To get the true, we should have the same data types and the same letters. Right now you see that Bob equals to Bob and it returns true, but if I change one letter to capital, we have false. Right now let's talk about logical not operator or toggler or inverter. At this point I will delete Bob condition and write true. If I save the file, we again see true. I can put an exclamation mark in front of this true to toggle the value to the false. If I save the file, right now we see that we have false, and we can read it as not true. Not true is false. And the same if I use false value, not false is true. The behavior is really simple. It just toggle the value or invert it to the opposite one. And we may use as many operators as want. I may put two not operator signs and save the file, but we will see that it returns to false. If we are using two not operators, it's the same as say not false. It's actually true. This is the reason why there is no sense to use more than one not operator, because it will return the original value. Right now let's talk about the operator that is the combination between triple equal and not operators. Let's imagine that you want to compare two items. I will write dog equals to cat. And I have a false value because dog is not equal to cat. But what if I want to ask from the point that what if our first string is not equal to second string? If I use not in my speech, it means that I should use not logical operator. I can try to put it somewhere, for example, in front of the first word, and it seems that it doesn't work. Maybe I should use parentheses. Yeah, in the parentheses, it seems that it works. Right now it works as dog is not equal to cat. But we see that this structure is really difficult to read. What it actually does, it compares our two objects, then returns some boolean value of true or false, and then toggle it back to the opposite value, and eventually we have true. But as you see, it's difficult to read. And for these occasions, we have combination of both these operators that looks much simpler. And if I save the file, we see that it works in the same way. So I can read it as dog is not equal to cat? Answer on this question is true. So that's the reason why I have true statement. If I put dog and dog, we can see false, because if dog is not equal to dog, but they're equal, that's the reason why this condition returns false. You start to understand how it works, and generally it's much simpler to use just triple equal operators, because it's easier to ask questions that don't contain not inside of them. Next group of operators are mathematical comparison operators. If you know them in the math, they're working in the same way. So this is less than, greater than, or less equals than, and greater or equals than. Let's start from the first two ones. We are typically using them to compare numbers. I can write 10 is less than 10. 10 less than 10. And if I say the file, we have false, because 10 is not less than 10. And let's also talk about how to read it. This pointed end or smaller part show the smaller number, and the bigger part, this kind of mouth, shows the greater number. In this case, it's quite easy to read. If you don't know them, so you can always think about them as, okay, we have two numbers, as this smaller part shows to the smaller number, and this like bigger part show the bigger number, so it should be true. But if I change them, right now you see that this is a smaller number and this is a bigger part, so it's false. Yeah, you can like spend time and think about them, especially if you are not used to these operators. And right now let's talk about second operators. This is more or equal to, and it returns false right now, but if I put 10 more or equal to 10, it should return true. Yeah, how it works, we can look at them as two different operators. So our first operator is greater, so I can ask a question, is 10 greater than 10? It's not, so I should check the second operator, that is equal. Is 10 is equal to 10? And I can say yes. Where we are using this operator, only one of the conditions should be true to return the all condition of true. One more example where I put here 4, and if I save the file, we have also true, because 10 is more than 4, yes. 10 is equal to 4, not. But only one condition should be true to return the true value that we have. When you're comparing numbers, you always should remember about 3 different outputs. If you want to compare two numbers, for example 10 and 12, it might give you 3 different outputs. 10 might be less than 12, 10 might be equal to 12, and 10 might be greater than 12. It's really important to consider always when you are comparing two numbers. You want to look at all these outputs that might be. Let's imagine that you have a program that compares first and second number, and if your first number is less than 12, or if your first number is equal to 12, it returns a smiley face, and otherwise we have only one output, when first number is greater than 12. In this case, it returns a motionless face or a Squidward face, yeah? This scheme consider all the 3 outputs that might be. And in the case where you want to reduce amount of outputs to only 1, as we have right here, it's better to use this scheme where you're combining operators less and equal together to get one condition, less or equal. Both these schemes work absolutely identical, and only one difference that we have, that in the second scheme we should create only 2 if statements, and it's easier to work because we have 2 outputs and eventually we have 2 outputs. We don't need to consider the third if statement, we have less code and it's easier to read. For the practice, I recommend you watching my next video where we will create an Akinator style game using comparison operators and knowledge learned today.